Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting us. So we're going to talk about getting ready for the next waves, plural, of generative AI. So I'm an associate professor at Sheffield Hallam University, associate professor learning and teaching, I should add. Peter's an educational consultant and visiting professor at Edge Hill University, and we've worked together for some time on a variety of different projects over the last decade relating to technology, and more recently, in the last couple of years, with regards to generative AI. And we've recently published a book with colleagues, which is a collection of case studies from the UK and from Australia. So I'll leave you there with the link to follow that up. So we do have quite an extensive slide deck. We won't go through in detail everything. The aim is to give you some links to useful things that you might want to follow up reading wise, or in some cases, videos. So obviously we can use a chat if there's any questions, we can address those at the end, or you can contact us afterwards. So Peter's struggling, I think. To start with a quote: "The future belongs to all of us, and when it comes to AI, the issues at hand are too complex and integral to be left to traditional AI experts alone." And we rather like this quote because it's really important that we all take a part of this. We all need to discuss this, and we need to bring our students into that conversation as well. So what we're going to cover in this session, hopefully Peter's going to be able to unmute and address the first section. So we're going to talk about the software, where it's going, how things have developed and continues to develop because it's changing all of the time. We're going to explore what we can do with generative AI and give some examples of how it could be used, should it be used in that way. Some things around the skills that we think people should be developing. We will also recognise the issues and concerns about using generative AI. So although that comes further into the presentation, we are very cognizant that it's important, again, to have those conversations about the issues, which we'll reveal when we get to that stage. And then we will provide some suggestions about what we think is important in terms of teams and university-wide strategies to use, implement and monitor really the use of generative AI.
Can you hear me now, folks?
We can indeed, Ian. Just in time, Peter.
Something has obviously gone into automatic save batteries or what have you, because it was working perfectly at 5 to 2. Anyway, we can start talking really about generative AI and why people should take it so seriously. We came across this paper which suggests that generative AI, in terms of the rate of adoption, is actually surpassing what happened with early PCs and internet usage. And there's now loads of stats which show how quickly it is being taken on board by people. Okay. So our first wave that we need to think about is how we understand generative AI, because we think it's really important that both staff and students understand that this is a new form of software. Okay. And what is new, this is from a book which also has quite a lot of good examples of how organizations and institutions are using generative AI. And the important sentence really is that final sentence down at the bottom, where GenAI is different from traditional AI, whereas GenAI excels at pattern creation, which is both its advantage and its curse, as we will show later. Okay. So we think it's really important that students understand that they are playing with a very different form of software, and we don't want to turn them into technical geeks, but we do want to explain to them that the structure of the software is very different, which again is some of its advantages and some of its disadvantages. And this is the diagram we tend to use, emphasizing the idea of the large data set, the specific computer architecture, and the chatbot, and the fact that you're not using it in the sense of a traditional database or a traditional data set. If you ask the same question tomorrow, you'll get a different answer. Okay. And of course, as well as text to text, we now have all the things that have come along in the last year to 18 months of text to image, which is getting better. And our example of how things are getting better is this picture from 2023. And if you count the fingers on the hand, you'll notice that there was some strange things going on in 2023 in image generation. Okay. And how good are AI generated images now? Well, I think one thing that we are now telling students is don't trust anything you see online, because AI generated images are so good. And the quiz there that you can use, that you can look up after this session, the deep fake game. And I'm not telling you how well I scored. Okay. And now, of course, we have multimodal, so that the large language models can treat audio, video, images, etc., etc. We'll say a bit more about that later on. And one of some recent examples here is this idea of AI-generated voices creating scams, where either you've been contacted by a supposed celebrity, which is the example on the left-hand side of your screen, or now scammers using your own voice as the deep fake. So if you're being scammed almost by yourself. Okay. And that leads us to the whole question of we raise with students about the general developments in generative AI, and in particular, the fact that all the organizations are looking for this notion of artificial general intelligence. And you see the 5 steps down there based on what OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, think. They reckon we are at somewhere between level 2 and level 3, that we're moving away from, we're moving beyond reasoners to this idea of agents. We'll come back to that in a minute. But the level 5 is their aspiration, where AI effectively takes over the organization. So you can get some interesting discussions going around that. Okay. And so in terms of specific developments that have been happening, that are happening now and will affect us over the next 6 months, there's this interesting notion that we're going to have new relationships with our software. And if you look at some of the pronouncements that are coming out of Microsoft, and this idea of the ongoing conversation with the co-pilot, your AI companion, quote, where it can help and support you throughout your entire day on almost anything that you're working on. And we certainly see a strong pressure from Microsoft and the other big players in this field to have it on by your side all the time. Okay. And this idea of agents, the idea not just of the chatbot, but the chatbot that can go away and do things somewhat autonomously. And if anybody was at the Microsoft, seen stuff from the Microsoft conference this last week, you will see that that is very definitely the way they're heading. And there's an example there of Microsoft are now using an example from McKinsey, where you're talking about client service agents. You need never talk to a human again. Okay. And there's the Microsoft vision from the conference that came out this last week. And if you want to follow that up, you can have a look at the links at the bottom of that page. So Copilot is now the UI for AI, and we have the agents as well. And you see a range of agents that were introduced. The facilitator agent is the agent that you invite to your Microsoft Teams meetings, who will participate in the meeting, who will write your minutes for you, who will perhaps remind you of something you've missed off the agenda. So there's some very interesting possibilities going to come out, and this sort of facility is coming in 2025. Okay. And of course, the other thing that's happening, of course, is you have more and more large language models. And if you say, well, I'm using ChatGPT, I will turn around to you and say, well, which model of ChatGPT are you using? If you happen to have a subscription, you now have a choice of all the different varieties of that model, which are on that page, including the latest, the OpenAI 01 preview, which is a model which thinks before it answers. So you have this rather interesting 10-second or 20-second pause before it provides you with an answer, on the grounds that it's going through a chain of thought which will give you a better answer. And you can see all sorts of developments like that. Do you want speed? Do you want quality of response? And also, do you now want voice? Because the latest version down the bottom there has a voice interaction in it. Okay. And particular trends that are going to hit us, I think there's definitely a new digital divide. We don't know what our next generations of students will actually come with in terms of will they have experience, will they have expectations, what devices will they take for granted? We were promised Apple Intelligence with all these facilities on your new Apple iPhone. What will our students actually have? And what are the costs and what is the impact? And we'll come back to that later, of all of these different factors. So,
okay, so what can we do with generative AI? So Costin's put together this useful list of things that we might do in relation to learning and teaching. So everything from the beginning and considering what the learning objectives might be, all the way through to grading and assessing. The question is, should we be using these? Should we be experimenting with them? And certainly that's something to consider. So in terms of technology, we alluded to the fact that it's now very much multimodal. So we've been used to, ChatGPT, the text to text, you put text in, you get text out, and DALL-E, you get images as examples. And these have really moved on over the last year or so. So you can actually get music created from text. You can create avatars. Obviously, you can translate languages. Hey Jen, you can put in text and it'll create a video and in the language that you want to. And more recently, Notebook LM, which we'll touch on later, you can put in text and it'll create a podcast, a discussion between two people, and other things on top of that. So in terms of the research cycle, there's a load of different tools. These keep emerging over time, but these are just some examples you might want to explore and take you through a typical research cycle. So, if students are doing a project, piece of research, dissertation, etc., these are the things that they could use or you might be using in your own research. So, the prompts and the things that you put in and the responses that you get, things are becoming more accurate. There is a disclaimer on all of the generative AI sites to say that, we can't promise this is going to be all correct, that they kind of give that away, that things can be wrong, but it is going to be accessible, so people are going to use it just as we would do Wikipedia. It's almost like Wikipedia on speed in a sense, but you have to fact check what you actually get from those results. Peter, do you want to do this one?
Oh yes, we mentioned advanced voice, which is now being rolled out to people with particular licenses for ChatGPT at the moment. And we came across this example, and you can follow it up. The link is there, and work through it. Effectively, the phone that you see in the image there is because somebody is recording a screen, effectively, which is an interview with Elon Musk, and is then asking the large language model to analyze that response. So you'll see that there's the conversation, a bit of the conversation on that with the large language model on that right-hand side. Can you tell me something about the AI future? And that's the sort of thing it can do. And if you shift to the next slide. So on this slide, you see two parts. On the left-hand side, the task that you set the large language model. I want you to be a communication skills expert. And on the right-hand side, some of its answers. So you say, can you tell me about the tone or the emotional intensity of the interaction between these two people? And it gives you a sensible answer. So the notion of using large language models as an analyst, which you can then compare, you can look at the logic of the rationale of the sort of answers that you're getting from the large language model and critique them. Because it's important, as we said earlier, not to take anything for granted that you get out of this software. So there's a really interesting kind of development exercise of analyzing images, discussing them with the large language model, and we'll see another example of that in a minute. Okay, so this is a notebook which we both used. It's a very new experimental, well, a few weeks ago it was experimental software from Google. They're now taking it off the experimental label, and they're saying that they're going to develop it as a product. But you can put in your text, so your notes, your papers, and then the other papers on a particular topic that you want. They don't get sent to off to the cloud. They exist in the notebook software, and you can then get notebook to create a study guide, a table of contents, a timeline, a briefing doc, and perhaps most significantly, a two-person podcast discussing whatever it is that you've put in as paperwork. And we, as I said, this is very new. It's about 2 or 3 weeks old, this particular variety of notebook, and we're thinking of experimenting with students, asking your students to talk to their own essay. It's an interesting thought. Okay, so
we also uploaded our book, didn't we? We wrote a book on success in group work, and that was really interesting. Hearing them discuss the book that we'd written and bring out bits that we perhaps might not have highlighted. So yeah, experimental, but interesting. Okay, and on to the next stage. So what new skills do we need to develop? Well, in terms of, the students and ourselves, the prompts that you put into these tools, what you put in is what you get out. So the better those prompts are, the more benefit you're going to get from the results. So this idea of prompt craft and prompt engineering, this Socratic questioning is actually good things for our students to develop, and so they can use it in lots of different ways, as illustrated on this slide here. But the most important thing is to bring that into the classroom and get students to try those out. And not all of the software is free, obviously. So if you've got access to something, that's maybe an exercise that you can do in the classroom, and talk about and critique the responses that come back. So the PAIR framework developed by ACAR suggests that there's four stages. So first of all, you think about what it is that you want to actually do, what's the challenge, and then you choose the appropriate tool that matches what is going to be most effective to help you with that problem or issue. Interact with that particular AI tool or a collection, because you might want to try a couple or more, and then reflect on that and discuss that, as I mentioned, with the students is a really good exercise. And then get into the critiquing what's correct, comparing that to other sources, etc.
And just to interrupt, Sue, and follow up a question from the chat, that if you flick back to the PAIR model, you'll find examples online of that being used with a whole variety of subject areas. I think ACAR himself comes from management or accounting or finance, but there's also some very good stuff on social work, very different context, but using that same model of setting up students to look at what they can get out of AI. Okay.
Yeah, so definitely good to follow up, because that gives you the inspiration to do things with your own students if you've not thought of things. So in terms of how students are currently using it, a study to follow up. So this initially started in 2023. Louise Drum from Edinburgh Napier, but they've had 3 iterations of this research. They've made their research methods open access. So if you want to have a try at doing something like that in your own institution, follow that up. They're made freely available, open source, and a study here at University of Sydney. So well worth having a look in your own time. So improving the prompts, as we mentioned, we could do a whole session on prompt engineering and how to do that effectively. But this concept map sort of gives you some ideas of the kinds of questions and detail that you put in, because the more detail and context, the better the answer is that you're going to get out. And that comes with practice, and the first iteration, you can, within ChatGPT, you can always go back and ask more questions, but useful for people that are just on the starting blocks and not used to yet using these tools. So we mentioned right at the start that there are some issues, and I'll hand back to Peter to talk through these.
Yes, and we've identified 8 really main issues there. I'm conscious of time, so I think we'll skip a few slides. What we have on the next set of slides, which will be available to you after this session, you can pick up the slides and use them as you will. And there are examples of each of those issues: the hallucinations, the hype, the unnecessary promotion of this technology is doing things which it doesn't do. You have the
Go forward.
Oops, going the wrong way. If you're looking at prediction in the future, we have a whole range of predictions. Okay, from end of the world, which you said on that slide, to more immediate future. And please follow up these sources when you collect the slides, and current thinking. And there's a whole range of current thinking, which range from this could be really dangerous through to this one from Mystique, AI by the people for the people. Okay. There's a whole growing area of regulation and intervention, and you might not be surprised to find that Elon Musk is at the center of some of this. Okay. And models can go wrong, and this is the example of Gemini, where they forgot to tell the software developers that if you're producing an image of a historical figure, it should be historically accurate rather than necessarily inclusive in the sense of showing different forms. And if you, that's, I think it's a Viking. Okay. And of course, there's all the issues about employment and employability, and there's, again, very different trains of thought emerging here. One is that it'll automatically lose jobs. The other is it will lose certain jobs, not others. And a growing sense from some organizations that their best strategy is to use AI and humans in some sort of integrative fashion. And there's a lot of stuff coming out about that. Okay. Okay, move on to, and there's one solution that we have, universal basic income. But a really important area, which we think is sorely neglected, is this environmental impact. Okay. And a very, very good TED talk that we discovered the other day here from Sasha Lucioni, looking at her work on identifying the costs and the impact and doing a lot of really good experimentation on it. And very definitely recommend you have a look at that. Okay. And we thought we'd include some statistics to horrify you. We'll not go through these, but the answers will be in the slides when you collect them. But you might want to contemplate that first one. A ChatGPT query is nearly 8 times as much electricity to process as a standard Google search. So what is A? Is it 1, 2, 3, 4? You may put your answers in the chat if you would, and we'll tell you at the end. Okay. Privacy and security is now a very, very big issue. Again, one of the things that came out of that Microsoft presentation last week is a whole host of new security measures that they're putting in their software. And they had this debacle where they introduced this software called Recall, which they had to withdraw because people did not want everything on their
Recall
PC
was recalled.
automatically recorded. Yes. Okay. So we think there's really some big issues here to bring out with students, to talk to staff about, and a series of elephants in the room. Costs, exploitation, and social justice in terms of the staffing that who actually process some of this stuff all over the world, and who controls GenAI. Another interesting question. Okay. I think we should move to the concept map slide, shall we?
Yep.
Because there's some thoughts there on assessment that you can have a look at. But we'd really like to end up on this with our final suggestions, the need for a strategy. And when we've been talking to universities about this over the last year, 18 months or so, we suggest that there are at least these 5 boxes that universities should be working on. A lot of universities are working on regulations and procedures. A lot of universities working on professional development. A lot of universities working on technical development and support. But what about that right-hand side of the diagram? What are your plans, your organization's plans for student engagement? And in particular, the box that we get a lot of interest in, the collaborative sandpit. Where's the area in your institution where staff and students can work together to explore this new technology? Because that one of the answers to the questions that are coming up in the chat about how we get people on board is we have to experiment with this, because nobody really knows quite how it's going to work. Nobody really knows quite what its long-term implications are going to be. So we need to have that. I'm just looking at a comment that's just appeared in the chat, is that critical thinking, questioning, evaluation are the real skills. And the only way we can do that is by doing that with students in the classroom on examples such as the image generation that we talked about a bit earlier on. By the way, the answer to that, the question of the ChatGPT query versus Google and what have you, is 10. Answers to those other questions will be in the slides. Okay, Sue, do we finish? I think we're done now. With
Yep,
one final
yep.
plug.
We'll stop sharing the screen there and see if there's a few minutes for questions.